Good morning. Thank you for logging to Amishakil 5858. I am Ame Budnam. I am thankful to all news resources and my team. Following news have been reported by American, European, Asian, African, Australian, and Canadian channels, and of course AFP, AP, and Reuters also reported the same news. Now the news in detail. A scientist group, Pollutant, says that the world's biggest meat and poultry producer is pouring into U.S. waterways. American Food Support Program and the inflation. A musical teacher's positive contribution to the society. Severe storm killed 14 people in Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. In Gaza, Palestine, Israeli and Hamas traded gunfire. 20 Palestinians were killed. In Papua New Guinea, landslide, 650 people under rubble. Richard Sherman, songwriter, has died. Call of Duty in Britain, Bangladesh, landslide. Korean, Japanese, and Chinese summit. Qatar Airways and turbulence. Ukraine and peace summit in Switzerland. French president in Germany. Now the news in detail.
Tonight on PBS News Weekend, the pollutants a scientist group says one of the world's biggest meat and poultry producers is pouring into U.S. waterways. Then how the government's food assistance program isn't keeping up with rising prices at the grocery store. And Grammy Award-winning teacher Annie Ray on her inclusive approach to music education.
I've gotten so many kind emails from these parents or spoken with them where they're like, my child seems so unhappy all the time, but here he's not. Or there might be a student who struggles in different aspects of the day, but here she's so incredibly successful and flourishing.
Major funding for PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. Powerful storms have killed at least 14 people, including 2 children, and left a trail of destruction across Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. The storms crossed Texas highways, tossing trucks and demolishing roadside structures in small towns. A local sheriff assessed the damage in his community.
We can rebuild property, and as horrible as this looks, probably in 2 or 3 months, it won't look like this. It'll be better, but the loss of life is just tragic. It's always tragic, and that's what hurts most.
At least 7 of the dead were in Cook County, Texas, near the Oklahoma border. In Arkansas, massive trees were uprooted. Across the region, hundreds of thousands of people remain without power. Severe storms delayed the start of today's Indianapolis 500. Race officials evacuated about 125,000 people who had gathered for the annual Memorial Day weekend event. The National Weather Service says there's a high risk of severe thunderstorms tonight from the Ozarks into the Ohio Valley region. In the Mideast tonight, an exchange of fire between Israel and Hamas. Palestinian medics say 22 people were killed in an Israeli airstrike in Rafah that hit tents full of displaced people. That followed a barrage of rockets that Hamas militants launched from Gaza at central Israel. In Tel Aviv, air raid sirens sounded for the first time in months. Frightened residents rushed to underground shelters. The Israeli military said it shot down a number of the rockets. There were no reports of casualties. In Papua New Guinea, the UN estimates that the bodies of more than 670 people are buried beneath the massive landslide that devastated the island nation on Friday. Crews have recovered only 5 bodies and the part of a 6th. They've been slowed by shifting ground. More than 1,200 people are homeless. And the man who co-wrote the soundtrack for generations of childhood memories is dead. Richard Sherman and his late brother Robert composed the music for films like Jungle Book and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. They won 2 Academy Awards for Mary Poppins, Best Score and Best Song for Chim Chim Cheree.
Chim Cheree, Chim Cheree, Chim Chim Cheree, a sweet princess lucky as lucky can be. Chitty bang bang, 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 chitty bang bang.
It's a small world after all. It's a small world after all. It's a small, small world.
In all, the Sherman Brothers wrote more than 200 songs and won 3 Grammys. In 2008, President George W. Bush awarded them the National Medal of the Arts. The commendation said their music helped bring joy to millions. Richard Sherman was 95 years old. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, why food assistance benefits aren't keeping up with inflation, and a Grammy Award-winning teacher on the importance of music for all.
This is the PBS News Hour, weeknights on PBS.
Tyson Foods is one of the world's biggest meat and poultry producers, and according to the Union of Concerned Scientists, it's also a major polluter in the United States. A report entitled Waste Deep says that in the 5 years between 2018 and 2022, Tyson plants dumped more than 371 million pounds of pollutants. And finally, on this Memorial Day weekend, amid the cookouts and the trips to the beach, I hope you find time to remember America's more than 1 million war dead and reflect on the values and principles they fought to protect. I am John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. Have a good week.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by
Tonight, at least 15 people are dead after a devastating tornado outbreak, and now the severe weather threat is shifting east. Millions are in the path of powerful thunderstorms, hail, potential flooding, and possible tornadoes as communities from Texas to Arkansas try to recover after a deadly night. The death toll is expected to rise. One apparent twister ripping through a neighborhood north of Dallas. Homes torn apart, a gas station where dozens sought shelter destroyed. Survivors searching the rubble. Another apparent twister touching down in Arkansas, where hundreds of thousands are without power, and powerful storms with lightning forcing a delay at the Indianapolis 500. Fans racing for the gate. What this could mean for an already record-breaking travel weekend. Our weather team is tracking it all from Texas. The search for answers in Massachusetts after a bizarre stabbing spree. 4 girls inside a movie theater attacked. A man and a woman also hurt at a McDonald's. Authorities say it all ended in a police chase and crash in Cape Cod, what we're now learning tonight. The desperate search for survivors in Papua New Guinea. Hundreds feared dead in landslides. Residents using their bare hands to dig for relatives. The rowdy reception for Donald Trump from the Libertarian voters at the party's convention. What the presumptive Republican nominee said in an unusual bid for support. The party's message to Robert Kennedy Jr. and the difference Libertarians could make in November. Tearful tributes pour in for pro golfer Grayson Murray, who passed away at the age of 30 just one day after withdrawing from a tournament. What his parents are saying tonight. At least a dozen passengers and crew hurt when turbulence strikes a Qatar Airlines flight to Dublin. The emotional victory at the Monaco Grand Prix that overshadowed the race's rocky start. And no doubt you'll know his music and his memorable soundtrack to our childhood. We remember the composer, Richard Sherman.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this Sunday. I'm Lindsay Davis. We begin tonight with breaking news. At least 15 people, including 2 children under the age of 5, killed during a deadly tornado outbreak in Arkansas, Kentucky, Oklahoma, and Texas. More than 100 million are at risk tonight for severe weather. A twister devastating Valley View, Texas, reducing homes and businesses to a mangled mass of rubble. Disaster declarations issued in 106 counties in Texas. Tree branches and debris blocking the streets of northwest Arkansas, making roads impassable. Lightning delayed the start of the Indianapolis 500 for 4 hours. Thousands of fans evacuating the stadium, and thousands of customers are in the dark tonight after widespread power outages. At least 25 tornadoes reported across 5 states on Saturday. All this comes during a record-breaking Memorial Holiday travel weekend. ABC's meteorologist Samara Theodore leads us off from the storm zone in Texas.
Tonight, a 2-year-old and 5-year-old among at least 15 people killed in a devastating tornado outbreak across Arkansas, Kentucky, Oklahoma, and Texas.
More than 200 homes and structures were listed as destroyed.
In Valley View, Texas, a town of just 700 people, destruction as far as the eye can see.
It was here at this gas station where 60 to 80 people ran for their lives seeking shelter, with one survivor describing this like a scene out of a movie.
We barely made it.
Peggy Heron and her husband Ricky pulled over as the tornado closed in. They returned to the scene today with their son to search for their red SUV.
The minute we got inside, we saw everybody, and the whole room it exploded just that fast.
Ricky says Peggy fell as they fled, and he had to drag her to safety.
As men, we try to protect our families. You realize that this thing is way bigger than you. It humbles you. It makes you realize how powerful nature can be.
Were there women and children and
Yes,
a lot of young?
this woman, she was looking for her child. I don't even know if she found her child, but there were just kids everywhere.
Astonishingly, authorities say no one's suffering serious injuries.
It's nothing less than a miracle. And I'm so glad you're okay, Mama.
I'm glad
you're okay. You hear me?
This dangerous storm system already wreaking havoc as it moves east. Lightning delaying the Indy 500, forcing thousands to flee the stadium. As millions of Americans break travel records this Memorial Day weekend, ABC's Jacqueline Lee at Hollywood Burbank Airport.
With nearly 30,000 delays and cancellations since the holiday weekend kicked off on Thursday, the FAA is warning travelers that Tuesday and Wednesday will be the next busiest days to fly, with weather as the leading cause for delays.
Travelers have to factor in the forecast for sure. Let's bring in our meteorologist, Samara Theodore, in the storm zone in Texas. Samara, give us a sense of the weather threat for tonight.
Well, actually, Lindsay, the National Weather Service has just issued a tornado warning for St. Louis, Missouri. This is a highly populated city. It's so important that folks have on their alerts right now and know where they're going to go in case they need to head to shelter. I want you to take a look at the tornado watch that we have issued. This is a PDS tornado watch, particularly dangerous situation. The tornadoes we're talking about, folks, are tornadoes that could be long tracking. They also have the potential for them to be very violent. Okay, now there's also a severe thunderstorm watch in effect. That spans from Ohio and Pennsylvania all the way down to the Carolinas as we head through this evening. Tomorrow, this threat shifts east, hitting the I-95 corridor. There, the biggest threat is damaging winds and hail, but I want everyone to know who's going to be traveling along the roads, there is a threat for flash flooding. Lindsay?
All right, gotta pay attention to that PDS warning in particular. Samara, thank you. Next tonight, a terrifying holiday attack. 4 girls stabbed by a knife-wielding suspect at a movie theater in the Boston area. Police describe the attack as random and unprovoked. A suspect is in police custody tonight. Authorities say he may be responsible for a similar incident in Plymouth. ABC's Rena Roy has the latest details.
Tonight, an urgent investigation underway after a holiday weekend movie night turned violent. A man going on a wild stabbing spree in Massachusetts. Walking into a movie theater in Braintree outside Boston Saturday evening, where police say he stabbed 4 young girls without warning, 3 of them sisters.
They were like in the second row, and he came up behind them. My oldest was leaned over to get something. He got her in the back, and then my other daughter in the top chest, and then my last daughter across her arm, laughing the whole time.
The oldest, 17, and the youngest, 9-year-old twins, all of them taken to area hospitals.
The two little girls are crying. Like, the oldest one, they're trying their best to keep their composure and everything.
Authorities say the suspect, identified as 26-year-old Jared Revisa, fled the scene in a black SUV, and about an hour later, police say he struck again, stabbing 2 workers at a McDonald's in Plymouth, reaching through the drive-through window with a knife, police using surveillance video to track his vehicle, state troopers chasing him down. Eventually, officials say he crashed his car in the town of Sandwich before he was taken into custody.
I think they are terrified that they could just go to a movie on a Saturday night and this could happen.
All the victims are expected to recover, but so far no word yet from police on a possible motive. The Plymouth County DA's office saying Revisa will face multiple charges, including assault with intent to murder. Lindsay?
Many relieved that he was captured. Rena, thank you. Overseas now in that horrific landslide in Papua New Guinea. Nearly 700 people are feared dead. Hope is fading of finding survivors buried beneath the earth in thick mounds of rubble. Drone footage captures the scope and scale of the damage. Conditions are making it difficult to bring aid in to survivors. ABC's Patrick Reevell joins us now with the very latest. Patrick, what can you tell us about the search?
Hi, Lindsay. Yeah, the United Nations now says that it fears 670 people may have been killed in that massive landslide that completely buried a village in a remote area of Papua New Guinea on Friday. A UN official says more damage is that they so far have only been able to recover 5 bodies. And locals are desperately trying to dig out survivors with whatever tools they can, mostly shovels, but hope is shrinking with the rubble more than 26 feet deep in some places. Some aid is starting to be delivered, but officials say the area remains extremely dangerous because some land is still sliding. They evacuated an additional 250 homes just today. Tonight's fears that the death toll could still rise even higher. Lindsay.
Just a devastating situation there, Patrick. Thank you. Next tonight, the war between Israel and Hamas. Hamas firing missiles at Tel Aviv for the first time in months. Here's ABC's Britt Clement.
Rockets were launched about half a mile from Israeli forces in Rafah, where the IDF is carrying out a military offensive, believing it is Hamas's last stronghold. The Israeli military today is saying that as their troops approached, Hamas emptied their ammunition and launched the rockets from an area with a civilian population, adding that they were launched from in between a mosque and a school. Footage published by Israeli media appeared to show minor damage in the outskirts of Tel Aviv. And Lindsay, an IDF official, telling me tonight that the damage was limited, saying as the pressure on Hamas increases, we expect this to happen. Lindsay.
Britt, thank you. Back here at home, the race for the White House. Former President Donald Trump got a rowdy reception at the Libertarian National Convention in Washington, D.C. Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was also on hand to woo voters, but got a warmer reception. Here's ABC's Mary Alice Parks.
I think you should nominate me or at least vote for me, and we should win together.
Former President Donald Trump heckled by a hostile crowd at a political convention this weekend. Libertarian Party members he had hoped to woo, booing him instead.
That's nice. That's nice.
Frustrated by the frosty reception, Trump mocking their chances for success at the polls without him.
Only do that if you want to win. If you want to lose, don't do that. Keep getting your 3% every 4 years.
It was an unusual event, the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party speaking at the Libertarian Party's national convention. Trump trying to appeal to their shared interests, a deep disdain for federal bureaucracy. But Libertarian Party members told me they do not see Trump as one of their own.
Donald Trump is not a libertarian because Donald Trump is an authoritarian.
Libertarians have been spoilers in the past, and could be again, especially in the tight race with so many voters dissatisfied with the 2 major party candidates. During his address, Trump calling out his Democratic rival.
Why isn't Joe Biden here speaking to you tonight?
And in a statement, the Biden campaign taking aim at Trump's record, saying Donald Trump says his Republican Party is the party of freedom, but tell that to the women who have had the freedom to make their own healthcare decisions ripped away. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. campaigning as an independent, blasting Trump over COVID lockdowns.
Greatest restriction on individual liberties this country has ever known.
Mary Alice Parks joins us now. Mary Alice, I know there was some question about whether RFK Jr. might secure the Libertarian Party nomination. It would have gone a long way, certainly, in ensuring that he was on nearly every state ballot, but it seems like that won't happen.
Yeah, Lindsay, that's right. It was sort of a surprise that he went for it. There was no real appetite for him there in the room. The Libertarian Party members that I talked to said they liked some of his ideas, but fundamentally they wanted someone who had been a member of their party. They really viewed him as more of a former Democrat. Lindsay?
Mary Alice, thank you. Tributes are pouring in tonight for golfer Grayson Murray after his sudden and shocking death. The new details coming in about the cause of death and the emotional reaction from his fellow golfers. Here's ABC's Alex Boucher.
Tonight, the golf world in mourning over the news that PGA golfer Grayson Murray died by suicide. Murray's parents releasing a statement saying, "We have spent the last 24 hours trying to come to terms with the fact that our son is gone," adding, "Life wasn't always easy for Grayson, and although he took his own life, we know he rests peacefully now." The 30-year-old withdrew from the Charles Schwab Challenge in Fort Worth, Texas on Friday, citing illness.
My parents have been through, hell and back basically for the last 6 years with me, fighting some mental stuff.
Murray had long been open about his struggles with alcohol and depression, admitting to drinking during tournament weeks in the past, but had made a turnaround this year, winning the Sony Open in Hawaii in January and reaching his highest ever world golf ranking of 46. Webb Simpson knew Murray since he was a young golfer.
You know, when you hear news like that over the phone, you don't think it's real at first, and so I'm super thankful for getting some good time with him.
Now, commissioner of the PGA Tour called the news about Murray devastating. Now, if you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, there is free, confidential help available 24/7. You can call or text the National Lifeline at 988. Lindsay.
Alex, thank you. Now to a warning about dangerous and deadly rip currents as millions head to the beach over the long holiday weekend. At least one person died and a dozen others were rescued after getting caught in strong rip currents in Galveston, Texas. More now from ABC's Irene Shaw.
As many people head to the beaches this holiday weekend, tonight, lifeguards along the coast of Texas sounding the alarm.
We have this really rough water with very strong rip currents. It's going to be rough throughout the whole weekend.
Nearly a dozen people rescued from a series of strong rip currents in Galveston. A 26-year-old tourist from Louisiana who lifeguards found face down in the water was pronounced dead at the hospital. So far this year in America, at least 7 swimmers have died after being caught in rip currents.
Ahead of the holiday weekend in Florida, 3 Good Samaritans saved this teenager from a rip current.
I'm a pretty decent swimmer, and that current was really ripping me.
Experts warned while the 3 rescuers were able to help, attempting a water rescue in a rip current should be done by a trained professional.
There's a lot of factors that happen. Is if you're in that turbulent wave, another thing that you might encounter is that person panicking, and they're just clawing at you and climbing on you, and they latch onto you.
Experts say the easiest way to spot a rip current, look for where the waves are not breaking. Another big tip, if there's a red flag warning, do not get in more than waist deep. Lindsay?
Potentially life-saving tips there, Zareen. Thank you. Overseas now, in a big sports headline, Charles Leclerc won the Monaco Grand Prix. The race got off to a rocky start after a massive crash during the first lap, delaying the competition for at least 40 minutes. But once it resumed, Leclerc, born and raised in Monaco, captured his first victory at his hometown race. This is his first Formula One victory in nearly 2 years. And there's so much more ahead on World News Tonight this Sunday. Mid-air turbulence sends some passengers and crew aboard a Qatar Airlines jet to the hospital. And a message from Nicki Minaj to her fans after canceling a concert in England. Next tonight, at least a dozen passengers and crew aboard a Qatar Airlines flight from Doha to Dublin were injured when the plane encountered turbulence. The plane managed to land safely in Dublin, where it was met by emergency teams. All of the passengers were assessed, and 8 were taken to a local hospital. A man is recovering tonight after he was set on fire on a New York subway train. Police say the alleged perpetrator fled the scene but is now in custody. They say the suspect threw an unknown flammable substance on the victim as the train was pulling into the station, causing the victim's shirt to ignite and burning his upper body. When we come back, the message from Nicki Minaj to her fans one day after she was forced to cancel a concert. To the Index now, a sad update to a story about a woman we've covered before. Betty Nash, who served as a flight attendant longer than anyone else in the world, has died. Nash first started flying back in 1957 for Eastern Airlines, which eventually became American Airlines. She never retired. She chose to fly the DC, New York, Boston shuttle so that she could be home every night for her son, who has Down syndrome. Betty Nash was 88. Grammy-winning rapper Nicki Minaj is apologizing to fans. Minaj had to cancel her concert in Manchester, England Saturday night after she was stopped by Dutch authorities at the Amsterdam airport, who accused her of carrying soft drugs, something Minaj has denied. She was arrested but later released with a fine. When we come back, remembering one of the creators of Disney's most memorable music. Finally tonight, you may not know his name, but you definitely know his music. Tonight, we remembered Richard Sherman. You know his music. It's as melodious as it is magical and memorable. Richard Sherman is world-renowned after all. He and his brother Robert wrote more than 150 of the beloved classics of our childhood and beyond, including earworms for Disney theme parks like It's a Small World.
For a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
But they may best be known for the songs they wrote for Mary Poppins back in 1964, which won them Oscars for Best Score and Best Song for Chim Chim Cheree. This popular song of theirs became a pop hit, reaching the Billboard Hot 100 in 1965. Bob Iger, the CEO of the Walt Disney Company, issued this statement, saying Richard Sherman was the embodiment of what it means to be a Disney legend, creating along with his brother Robert the beloved classics that have become a cherished part of the soundtrack of our lives.
Feed the birds,
Most of the Sherman Brothers songs appeal to all ages, something they learned from Walt Disney himself. He once told us early on in our career, they said, don't insult the kid, don't write down to the kid, and don't write just for the adult. So we write for Grandpa and the 4-year-old and everyone in between.
The little old bird woman comes.
For the 50th anniversary of Disney Animation Studios, Richard returned to Walt Disney's office right alongside Dick Van Dyke.
Walt used to call me in on a Friday afternoon with my brother Bob, and he'd sit down over here and say, play it. And I would play Feed the Birds. He loved that song.
Richard Sherman was 95. What a talent. Thanks for watching. I'm Lindsay Davis. Hope to see you right back here tomorrow. Until then, have a good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Moore, America's most watched newscast.
Tonight, violent storms killing at least 15 people, tens of millions still at risk. Terrifying scenes across the heart of the country. Tornadoes ripping through neighborhoods, decimating these houses. Look at this woman caught driving through the middle of one tornado.
The car! We're in it! I can't do anything!
The latest on the search and rescue and the danger ahead tonight. Another mid-air scare, a dozen people hurt in bad turbulence on a flood.
It was quite scary. It stopped, which it didn't, but then dropped.
What's behind scenes like this one? Sirens blaring in Tel Aviv for the first time in months. Why Hamas now says it launched rockets directly at that Israeli city. A tough crowd for former President Trump.
That's nice.
Why he was booed at the Libertarian Convention, plus what to expect from closing arguments this week in his criminal trial. The millennial teen and avid gamer, nicknamed God's Influencer, who could become the next Catholic saint. A summer travel warning, viral videos like these of baggage being thrown, dropped, even destroyed. How you can better protect your stuff when you fly.
Cook Studio, Season 15.
Dropped, even destroyed. How you can better protect your stuff when you fly. And ahead of Memorial Day, one soldier's tribute to the fallen and a performance decades in the making.
This is NBC Nightly News with Hallie Jackson.
Good evening.
Tonight, deadly weather. Severe storms and suspected tornadoes kill at least 15 in Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. And it's not over yet. We'll tell you where these dangerous storms are moving next, plus the impact it could have on your travel plans this busy Memorial Day weekend. Also tonight, hostile territory. Former President Trump faces hecklers and booing on the campaign trail at the Libertarian Party convention. How he handled the rowdy crowd.
You should nominate me or at least vote for me, and we should win together.
costly cookouts, how inflation is hitting your barbecue from burgers to sides. Also, threats against Congress, an increasing number of investigations sparked by safety concerns.
It shows no sign of abating.
And later, honoring our heroes. We'll take you to a little town in Italy, living up to the promise of never forget.
They have kept their memories alive all of these years.
They didn't forget.
They never forgot.
This is the CBS Weekend News from New York with Jerica.
We're doing record numbers with the African American voters. They are tired of what's happening to them. But there's been no president since Abraham Lincoln that has done more for the black individual in this country than President Donald J. Trump.
I'm not a political expert, but I wonder if it might be better for candidates to address the issues of 2024 rather than hearkening back to the Civil War. Joining us now are two political experts who were not around for the Civil War, Mark Thiessen and David Carlucci. Mark, unity used to be seen as a plus. I mean, candidates talked about bridging gaps and bringing the country together, and Biden mentioned the word unity in his inaugural address more times, I think, than any other president. Is unity even a winning argument anymore, or is sowing the seeds of aggrievement the present and future of politics?
Well, it was a winning argument in 2020 because that's what he ran on. He just didn't deliver it. He's been one of the most divisive presidents in my lifetime. When you go out and say to a black audience, college graduates are about to enter the world and possibly change the world, and instead of a hopeful, optimistic message, you say, you love your country even though it doesn't love you back, and contrast that with what Donald Trump did on Thursday when he went to the Bronx and spoke directly to black and Hispanic voters who are disaffected by Joe Biden's his presidency, his policies, and he said, I'm going to fight like hell for you. I'm going to focus on solving problems. The Biden presidency has been a disaster for black and Hispanic Americans, and you were doing great under my presidency, and I'm going to focus on bringing you back and giving you opportunity and lifting you up. Those are the contrasting messages, and that's the reason why Donald Trump right now is getting 23% of the black vote, which would be the most, if that happened, would be the most of any president since 1964. Any Republican.
David, it's hard to find a clip where James Carville is not cussing, but I think we found one. I want us to listen to it together for a second, then I'll ask you a question on the other side.
I do think the president has to deal. The age issue is suffocating him, and he needs to bring up that he's only 4 years older than Trump.
I saw him yesterday making that speech. I mean, I'm sorry, he's cadaver-like.
But his brain is good.
David, age may be a factor for some people, but the real issue, I think, is mental acuity, or the perception of decline, regardless of whether it's President Trump, President Biden, anybody else. So how will voters process age and acuity versus policy this time around, in your judgment?
Well, I think you're right. It's about mental acuity. It's about what are they actually talking about. And look, Donald Trump gives this air of more vibrancy. But when you look closely and you actually listen to what Donald Trump is saying, you can't really hear much. That rally in the Bronx, he's pointing out problems, this and that, but he's not saying what he's going to do. There you could juxtapose what President Biden's actually done. He's actually delivered money to the Bronx, to the South Bronx. I think the positive news that we see as Democrats is that the latest polling, although it shows favorability for Donald Trump, that's only among the overall electorate, but not people that are actually going to come out to vote. When you look at the people that actually voted in 2020, Joe Biden is winning that race. So I think the details matter, and people, once they get more engaged and learn about the actual policies, I believe they're going to fall in line with Joe Biden. Because Donald Trump, yes, he's a good salesman, he's a good entertainer, but I think it stops there. You get the entertainment, but you don't get any substance with Donald Trump.
All right, Mark, I've seen more enthusiasm and ransom notes and hostage videos than Governor Haley's comments about voting for Trump. So my question to you is, does it matter how enthusiastic she is? Will reluctant GOP voters, including herself, come home, do you think, or stay home?
Well, Donald Trump has to bring them home. It's on him to do it. I mean, I'm glad that she gave that endorsement. But he can't leave any. One thing I do agree with David that David just said is that the race is going to get tighter. Donald Trump can't afford to leave any votes on the table, particularly GOP votes. So he's got to reach out to Haley voters. They're the swing voters of this 2024 election. They're going to decide it one way or another. But the reality is what David was saying before. The polls show that right now 55% of Americans think Donald Trump's presidency was a success, which is a reverse from 3 years ago when 55% thought it was a failure. 61% of Americans think Joe Biden's presidency is a failure. So on the merits, on the substance, they think Biden's a failure and Trump was a success. And so when he goes out and says, "I'm going to bring back was it great under me? Weren't you doing better? Weren't you making more money and more comfortable? And wasn't inflation lower?" He's going to have that's going to resonate with the American people.
All right, I'm going to give you a chance to show unity. You're the Republican strategist. Donald Trump just called you and said, "Okay, who should I pick to be my vice presidential running mate?" What name do you give him? I'm going to make you give free advice to a Republican. You can send me a bill, but who should he pick to be the VP running mate?
I think it would be Nikki Haley, because I think that would show some humility and pick up exactly what we're talking about here, making sending an olive branch to many disenfranchised voters. Donald Trump has really not done that since the primary. He hasn't moved to the center. He hasn't reached out to people that disagree with him. He's gone hard, MAGA, hard to the right. And yes, it rallies the troops and it gets the diehard supporters out, but I don't think it does much to win over those independent voters. So I think we're doing really well to pick Haley.
He just did that in the Bronx. He just went to a deep blue city and got a crowd that Joe Biden could only dream of. I don't think Joe Biden could pull that crowd in the South Bronx. And he reached out to black and Hispanic voters and Democrats. He's doing exactly what you're saying. I appreciate your advice as a Republican. Thank you.
He's also doing great for tourism in New York, because I was there last week for the trial, and I'll be back again this week. So he is an economic juggernaut for New York City right now. Thank you both for joining us. I look forward to having you both again real soon.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page.
On this Sunday night, sirens sound in Tel Aviv. For the first time in months, Hamas rockets rain down on Israel as trucks carrying desperately needed aid finally enter Gaza. Scrambling for shelter.
When it hit, it was just so loud.
Powerful tornadoes tear through the central United States. Mandatory military service.
We will introduce a bold new model.
The British Prime Minister's controversial campaign promise.
Global National with Foreign Answer. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. For the first time in 4 months, air raid sirens sounded in Tel Aviv, sending Israelis scrambling for cover. Hamas launched at least 8 long-range rockets. Several were intercepted and no one was hurt. But Israel says it underscores the threat Hamas continues to pose after 7 months of war. This 84-year-old and her caretaker barely escaped. She described the chaos when a rocket landed on her house. Israel says the rockets were fired from Rafah in southern Gaza. The Israeli military is preparing to launch a major offensive on that city, despite pleas from its allies and the UN's top court. And a warning, the images you're about to see here are disturbing. This was the aftermath of an Israeli strike on Rafah today. At least 30 people were killed, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society says the Israeli attack hit an area designated for displaced civilians. Well, late today, the Israeli military commented on that airstrike in Rafah, claiming it was targeting a compound housing Hamas militants, and that it successfully eliminated 2 senior Hamas leaders. David Aiken has our top story tonight.
For the first time in 4 months, air raid sirens sounded in Tel Aviv. Residents scrambled for cover. This video, released by Hamas, shows the missiles leaving Gaza. And the Israeli army says they were launched from Rafah, from a site less than a kilometer where Israeli forces were stationed.
Hamas launched these rockets from near 2 mosques in Rafah. Hamas has been attacking Israel from Rafah.
1 person in Israel was injured seeking shelter from the attack, and damage otherwise was minor. This house in central Israel was damaged by a shrapnel hit. Still, it was a demonstration that even after 7 months of fighting, Hamas still has significant weapons. Meanwhile, Israel allowed around 200 aid trucks through the Kerem Shalom crossing at Gaza's southeastern corner, bypassing the main Rafah crossing that has been closed for weeks. But some of the food has been waiting so long to cross, it is beginning to rot.
Very good to see you, Prime Minister. Thank you.
And on the diplomatic front, Norway's foreign minister Sunday presented Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa with papers confirming Norway's recognition of the state of Palestine.
We very much look forward to upgrading our diplomatic and consular relations with the state of Palestine.
Mustafa used the opportunity to repeat calls for an end to the war.
I think it's time to go beyond condemning actions and requesting Israel to stop the war. I think we need to raise the voices a little bit more and demand ceasefire.
But the rocket attack makes a ceasefire much less likely. One hardline minister in Netanyahu's cabinet urged the army to hit Rafah even harder. David Aiken, Global News, Ottawa.
Israel also struck several targets inside southern Lebanon today, killing at least 8 people. Israel says the strikes were in response to an earlier attack by Hezbollah that saw 15 rockets launched into Israel from southern Lebanon. And the war in Gaza continues to spark protests here in Canada, and a deadline is fast approaching for protesters at Canada's largest university. Members of a pro-Palestinian encampment at the University of Toronto are meeting with the administration, which has given them until tomorrow morning to clear out. Protesters are presenting the university's leadership with a counteroffer after rejecting the administration's proposal last week. The protesters are demanding the university cut all ties with Israeli institutions and companies they say are profiting from the war in Gaza. A trespass notice was issued to the camp on Friday, and demonstrators now have until 8 a.m. to leave, or the university says it will take all necessary legal steps to remove them. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made a dramatic plea for the leaders of China and the U.S. to attend a major peace summit in Switzerland and apply pressure to the Kremlin.
We do not want the UN Charter to be burned down just like these books.
That's Zelensky speaking from the war-ravaged Kharkiv region, where Russia has escalated its attacks in recent weeks. His message directed at U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping, calling on them to compel Vladimir Putin to end the war. Turning now to the other big story of the day, a series of deadly storms in the southern United States. Take a look. This is all that remains of a Shell gas station in Valley View, Texas, after a series of powerful tornadoes whipped through Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. People near that gas station say they had mere seconds to find shelter.
We ran up under the stairs and the little bathroom, and then it went boom, like we got hit by lightning or something, and then you could whistling. It's scary. That's the worst I've ever experienced.
At least 15 people were killed in those tornadoes, including 2 small children, and dozens more were injured. Crews are now scrambling to pull survivors from the rubble. The storms in Texas coincided with record-breaking heat over the U.S. Memorial Day weekend. And as Heather Yorks West reports, forecasters warn this is just the beginning of wild weather ahead.
Incredible video as a tornado forms in North Texas Saturday afternoon, part of a supercell storm that erupted over the region.
When it hit, it was just so loud. It was like something just crashed into us, and I knew, and I didn't realize how bad until we came out.
In Texas, at least 7 people are confirmed dead so far, including 2 children aged 2 and 5.
It's like a push to the stomach, really. I mean, this is my community. This is I know people that work here, and I see them every day.
In Oklahoma, what is believed to have been a long track tornado damaged homes and trees in 2 communities northeast of Tulsa. Baseball-sized hail was also reported. 2 people were killed in the storm that rolled in quickly early Sunday morning.
I'm still trying to process it. It's shock. Just everything you had worked so hard for all these years is gone.
It was loud. I've never heard glass break in my life, and it was so scary. I'm just glad that my mom got me out. She got me out in a minute. Like, after she got me out and I was sat down, my glass immediately broke and that tree hit my window.
Parts of Arkansas were hit hard, too. Officials say thousands in the state are without power and at least 1 person is confirmed dead. Earlier this week, tornadoes in Iowa killed at least 5 people.
Several states will be impacted by several storms on Memorial Day. The storm is moving towards the east and extending all the way towards the southeast. And with it, it'll bring strong winds, large hail, and triggering tornado watches.
2024 shaping up to be one of the worst spring storm seasons in at least 5 years, with more severe weather still to come. Heather Yurex West, Global News, Calgary.
12 people have been injured by severe turbulence on a Qatar Airways flight from Doha to Dublin. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner still managed to land safely and on schedule. Passengers say the turbulence lasted less than 20 seconds and hit during food and drink service. It comes just days after a similar incident involving severe turbulence on a Singapore Airlines flight. That saw dozens of passengers injured and 1 man killed in a suspected heart attack. It's been 10 months since flash flooding devastated parts of Nova Scotia, and some homeowners are still struggling to repair the damage. The flooding killed 4 people, destroying roads and swamping hundreds of homes. As Heidi Petracek reports, many Nova Scotians are still waiting for help that was promised by the province.
When floodwaters rushed into streets and homes in Nova Scotia last July, it caused more than $170 million in insured damage.
The driveway was covered.
And the flood burst through the back door and into Clifton Crux basement. Photos show the aftermath. The water had been high enough to make appliances float and left everything caked in mud. His estimated restoration cost $143,000, taxes in. His insurance capped at $50,000.
I took $50,000 off of $143,000, left me with $90,000 and change.
Then he applied to Nova Scotia's Disaster Financial Assistance Program, which pledged up to $200,000 for homeowners. But after months of waiting and piles of paperwork, Kruk was offered $6,000. He appealed and was then offered $15,000. At 74 years old, he's taken out a second mortgage to pay for the $60,000 he has left.
What would you say if somebody said, we're going to put your home back to the way it originally was? Just pay my contractor's bill. That's all I want.
The province is still processing more than 500 disaster assistance applications from the floods. 1,100 have been paid out to the tune of $14 million.
For the ones that haven't been paid out, we're certainly very sympathetic. We know it's been very traumatic for them, but it's been challenging for us too.
Flooding is actually the costliest natural hazard in Canada in terms of property damage.
It's why the Intact Centre on Climate Adaptation created a tool to help municipalities prepare for and prevent urban flooding, which is expected to increase in frequency.
We're expecting more kind of short duration, intense rainfall events, and we have, I think, everyone knows examples of those across Canada.
My doctor's increased a lot of my medications.
The stress has taken its toll on Kruk. He's not sure he could take another flood, especially after what he's paid for this one. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Middle Sackville, Nova Scotia.
The remains of an unknown soldier from Newfoundland, killed fighting in France during the First World War, has finally returned home. The casket arrived last night in St. John's after the French government formally transferred the remains to Canada in an emotional repatriation ceremony, held on the very battlefield where he died more than a century ago. The unknown soldier's remains will now be interred at the National War Memorial in downtown St. John's on Newfoundland's Memorial Day on July 1st. Pushing British teens into service. Coming up, the UK Prime Minister's controversial call of duty. Another terrible tragedy to tell you about in India tonight. At least 7 babies are dead after a fire at a maternity hospital in Delhi. A fire broke out last night in the Indian capital. Several infants survived and are being treated for smoke inhalation. The cause is under investigation, but authorities have already arrested 2 doctors, including the hospital's owner. The death toll is climbing dramatically after that major landslide in Papua New Guinea. A UN agency says more than 670 people are feared dead after an entire village was buried Friday morning. That number is more than double the initial estimate. So far, only 5 bodies have been recovered from the rubble. More than 1,200 others have been left homeless by the disaster, and officials are now struggling to deliver badly needed aid to the remote area after the landslide cut off access to major roads. Well, just days after the British Prime Minister triggered an election, Rishi Sunak has announced a controversial campaign pledge. Sunak says if re-elected next month, he will bring back mandatory national service. The plan involves 18-year-olds choosing to either enlist in the military or perform community work. But the proposal could remain just that if Sunak's political fortunes don't improve fast. Redmond Shannon explains.
And we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
The timing of Rishi Sunak's drenched election call surprised many, as has his first big campaign announcement.
We will introduce a bold new model of national service for 18-year-olds.
The plan would see teens choose between a year in the military or complete 12 weekends of community work across a year. The vast majority would do the latter. Sunak claims it would help society and national security. The 16-year-olds who can't vote yet could be among the first to be enrolled.
Yeah, I found it on TikTok in the morning. My parents were speaking about it. Yeah.
And what are your parents saying?
It was divided. I can't lie. My dad, because my dad, he thought Rishi Sunak idea was good, but my mum otherwise.
I really don't want Rishi Sunak to win. After especially hearing about what he's done with this now as well, I don't want him to win.
It's 64 years since Britain has had national service, but with the governing Tories far behind in the polls, this could be seen as a Hail Mary pass to appeal to disillusioned voters. 80-year-old Peter Lyons remembers his uncle being called up to serve. He says the plan is a reflection of global instability.
They're suddenly woken up to the fact that the British Armed Forces are not anywhere near prepared to fight
a war anywhere.
Former social worker Steve Outerson believes it's purely election politics.
I think it's a gimmick, you know, it'll never see the light of day. I think it's just clutching at straws. I think if you really care about young people's welfare, you would invest properly in education.
The idea is far from unique in Europe. Many peaceful nations have forms of mandatory military service, among them Denmark, Finland and Switzerland. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Mexico is sweltering in an intense heat wave. Dozens of people have died from the so-called heat dome, and the most intense temperatures are yet to come. Mexicans are facing bone-dry conditions and serious water shortages. Water delivery has become a critical service in Mexico City, where temperatures could hit 35 degrees. That's far hotter than what the capital is used to, and unbearable in a city where only the well-off have air conditioning. Next, Messi missing in action. How Vancouver soccer fans responded to a superstar snub. Well, as expected, it was a full house at BC Place in Vancouver last night for the much-anticipated match between the hometown Whitecaps and Inter Miami. That, despite a last-minute no-show, Argentina's World Cup superstar Lionel Messi was missing in action, and BC soccer fans were fuming. Trying to make the best of a messy situation, Whitecaps fans got creative with their chants, and even their attire. Snubbed by soccer's top superstar, the disappointment on full display.
It's like going to see Taylor Swift and then the concert's going to start and Taylor Swift doesn't appear. You'd have every reason to be upset.
Unlike Messi, that crowd did show up as expected, setting an all-time attendance record. More than 51,000 soccer fans packed BC Place, some traveling huge distances and paying big bucks for tickets to catch a glimpse of the world's best. His club, Inter Miami, says the decision to keep Messi, along with striker Luis Suarez and Spanish midfielder Sergio Busquets at home, was Major League Soccer's grueling travel schedule.
MLS has, in the conversations with us, told us that they will look into it. You get Inter Miami to fly all the way across the continent to play one soccer match. You can understand why Miami decided not to bring him or their other star players.
Unsatisfied with that explanation, fans are calling for compensation.
Fans were willing to pay whatever it took to get a chance to see this guy on Canadian soil. A full refund, full credit, something, because they should not be profiting from this.
The Whitecaps offered fans free tickets to a future game and half-price food and drinks, but many still left with a bad taste in their mouths.
Maybe sports fans have to unite and say, enough is enough. If we don't see a star player, we want our money back.
In the end, Miami didn't need Messi, beating the hometown team in their first ever meeting 2-1. And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is this mural of Quebecois singer, songwriter, and poet Leonard Cohen in Montreal. We love seeing Your Canada, so please keep emailing your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you back here again tomorrow. Have a great night.
Them recently?
No, she hasn't.
You're Billy Piper, aren't you? Dads can be difficult. Seeing the chorus.
Austin starts Sunday, June 9 on ABC and ABC iView.
Today, Australia offers support to Papua New Guinea with nearly 700 feared dead in a landslide. Dozens of displaced Palestinians reportedly killed in a designated safe zone in Rafah. 2 killed in a multi-vehicle crash in Sydney, including a young girl. Victorian police officer accused of racism while giving a youth crime presentation to public servants. And from boomers to zoomers, workplaces now regularly hosting 4 generations. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Roz Childs. Almost 700 people are feared dead from the devastating landslide that hit a remote village in Papua New Guinea's Highlands region on Friday. Bodies are slowly being pulled out of the rubble, but locals say more help is desperately needed. It's Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts. So Stephen, what's the situation like on the ground right now?
Well, in a word, Roz, the situation on the ground in Papua New Guinea is grim. As you mentioned, this is a disaster of incredible proportions. It's feared that some 700 people may be dead. Now, it's still not clear exactly what that final death toll figure may be. It could be less than that, it could be more than that, to some degree everyone to grapple with, but hopefully more aid can reach those who need it on the ground in the coming 24 hours.
Thanks, Stephen. Palestinian health officials say at least 35 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a camp for displaced people in southern Gaza. It happened in the Tal al-Sultan neighborhood in the city of Rafah, a district that had been designated by Israel as a humanitarian area. Fires tore through tents, with many of the injured taken to hospital suffering serious burns. Israel has confirmed the strike, saying it targeted a Hamas compound where militants were located. Most of the dead and injured are reportedly women and children. Shocked witnesses have described chaotic scenes.
They burnt the people. They burnt them. They burnt a whole neighborhood. People are still burning. What else can I say? I cannot say anything.
Channels, the head of the CIA is involved in these quiet talks, so we just don't know where that will go.
John, thank you. 2 people including a 12-year-old girl, have died after a multi-vehicle crash in Sydney's southwest. Reporter Jessica Rendell has the details.
I'm outside Westmead Hospital, where 2 survivors of that fatal car crash are currently recovering. They were taken here last night after the vehicle that they were driving in, which police believe was a rideshare vehicle, collided with a ute on Milperra Road in southwest Sydney at around 7:40 last night. When emergency services arrived on the scene, they found that rideshare vehicle, a sedan, had collided with a ute and rolled over, and the passengers were trapped inside. A 12-year-old girl and a 41-year-old man were pronounced dead at the scene, and a 10-year-old boy, who was another passenger in that car, along with the 52-year-old rideshare driver, was taken here to Westmead Hospital, where they're currently being treated for serious injuries, but it's understood they are now in a stable condition. condition. As for the driver of the ute, he was a 19-year-old man. He suffered minor injuries and was treated at the scene, but he was taken to hospital for mandatory testing. Now, the Crash Investigation Unit has been looking into this, and they are opening an investigation. They're asking the public to come forward with any dashcam vision they might have. So anyone who was driving on Milpera Road last night between the hours of 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. are being urged to come forward with that vision, as it may be able to help police with their investigations. Anyone who witnessed the incident is also being urged to contact Crime Stoppers.
Jessica Rendell there. WA Premier Roger Cook says the government will look into whether stronger gun laws could have helped police prevent a double murder-suicide in Perth's western suburbs. Mother and daughter were shot dead in their own home by a 63-year-old man. Reporter David Webber joins us now from Floreat. David, what more do we know about this gunman?
Well, Mark Bombara lived in Mosman Park, which is several suburbs away from where we are here in Floreat. He came here on Friday to the house behind me and shot Jennifer Patelchik and Gretel Patelchik. There had been a relationship breakdown, and his ex-wife had been staying here. They were innocent parties. They weren't related to Mr. Bombara. He apparently had 13 guns registered to him, and we've heard from the Premier this morning saying that under the laws that they're trying to get through the Parliament at the moment, he wouldn't be able to own that many guns. Roger Cook said that he hadn't had a formal briefing as yet, but what he was looking for was what police could have done, if they could have done any more, if there were different firearms in place. Now, he did say also that the ex-wife was supported as part of the breakdown of the relationship. Police have said it's technically not domestic violence, but the Premier said it had domestic violence dimensions because of the ex-wife having stayed here. The Premier said that 13 would be beyond the number of guns that someone would be allowed to keep as part of the laws the government is trying to get through, and there's a direct correlation between the number of guns in the community and gun-related crime. So the way to reduce crime in the community is to reduce the number of guns. So he says the laws will be the toughest in the land, and they may make further changes depending on police advice.
So, David, how successful has the voluntary gun buyback scheme been?
Yes, there has been a buyback scheme in place. More than 11,000 firearms have been surrendered, and more than half of them have apparently come from the Perth metropolitan region, which would be a surprise to people as to how many guns were in Perth.
David, thank you. And if the story has raised any issues for you, you can get help by calling the National Sexual Assault and Family Violence Counselling Helpline. That's on 1800 RESPECT, which is 1800 737 732. Almost 2 years after it began, the coronial inquest into the Northern Territory police shooting of Kumanjai Walker is scheduled to end this week. The officer involved in the 2019 shooting, Zachary Rolfe, has been acquitted of all charges related to the death. Lisa McKay reports from Alice Springs.
Well, this inquest was last scheduled to end in February of this year when former Northern Territory Police Constable Zachary Rolfe was called to give evidence. He answered questions over 5 days in the coroner's court, detailing explosive allegations of widespread racism within the Northern Territory Police Force. That evidence triggered an internal police investigation as well as an ICAC inquiry, and also a lot of legal argument within the courtroom. And that, coupled with a lot of objections to evidence and technical troubles, meant that the inquest was unable to finish in those 5 days. So we have returned to the Alice Springs local court for what is scheduled to be the final 3 days of evidence in the coronial inquest into the death of Kumanjai Walker. The coroner so far has heard from 71 witnesses. We've had more than 60 sitting days of hearings here in the Alice Springs local court, and this inquiry, which was initially scheduled to take 3 months from September to December of 2022, has now been running for about 20 months. The coroner over the next 3 days is expected to hear further evidence from Zachary Rolfe, and it's expected that those allegations of widespread racism will come up again over the next couple of days. We anticipate there will be a lot of questions about that. The ICAC itself handed down a further report on Friday of last week detailing some of those allegations that were made by Zachary Rolfe back in February about the Northern Territory's Tactical Response Unit, an elite section of the Northern Territory Police Force, and the ICAC found that there was evidence of racist language and behaviour within that group. So while the TRG was not involved in the arrest of Kumanjai Walker back in 2019, it is expected that that evidence will come up over the next few days as the coroner investigates the broader culture of the Northern Territory Police Force. Zachary Rolfe is the last witness scheduled to be called to this inquest. We're also expecting to hear further evidence from one of his former police sergeants, Lee Bowens, this morning before further questions are put to Mr. Rolfe.
Staff from Victoria's Department of Justice have raised significant concerns about a presentation given by police that many found disturbing, gratuitous and racist. An investigation by the ABC has revealed that several staff complained internally, and the issues were then raised at the highest level between the department and police. Reporter Monique Hoare joins us now from Melbourne. Good afternoon, Monique. So what was the presentation about?
Rose, this presentation was all about youth gangs in Victoria and came off the back of an international gangs conference held here in Melbourne in May last year. It was designed to give public servants working in the youth justice space an insight into exactly what police are dealing with. But those public servants say that they were shocked by the presentation, saying it was racist and unfairly focused on young people from African backgrounds. They raised some serious concerns about particular comments from the presenter, which they say included things like describing a 13-year-old as an offender for life, repeating racial slurs like the N-word that were contained in social media posts, and also laughing inappropriately when identifying people in prison. They also say that they were shocked and disturbed by a number of the graphic footage and materials shown within that presentation, including footage of assaults and even CCTV vision of someone being stabbed to death.
And what's been the response from staff and the broader community, Monique?
It's been a really swift response. We know that within an hour of that presentation having finished, that the complaints had begun. And the reason we know that is because the ABC has obtained more than 200 pages of internal emails and documents from within the Department of Justice that really chart the fallout in this presentation. Staff reported being extremely affected, distressed and even disturbed, and their concerns were immediately escalated to the head of the department and then to the then acting Chief Commissioner of Police. In terms of a broader response, in the course of this story we have spoken to criminology experts and also Victoria's African community. Andrew Ohide from the South Sudanese Community Association of Victoria couldn't speak specifically about this presentation, but did talk about the experience of young people in his community, saying they often felt unfairly targeted by police, by media reports about youth crime, and also by the broader public perception often when out with friends.
Absolutely rubbish. It's not helpful. For a community to be safe, we need to look to each other and see all of us Australians.
We just need to listen to those young people in those communities when they tell us that they are made to feel that they don't belong in a society where they've been born and raised. They are made to feel that they are constantly under suspicion, and unless they're acting on, above anybody else's expectations of perfect behaviour, then they're seen as a risk.
Monique, how's Victoria Police responded?
Victoria Police wouldn't be interviewed for this story, but they did provide a lengthy statement in which they said the intent of the presentation was to show the realities of youth crime, how it's affecting police and the broader community. In that statement, they said there was ample warnings over the graphic material and denied that the presentation was racist or focused on any particular group. Police did concede, though, that repeating those racial slurs from social media posts may have been offensive. Police said that they apologised to the relevant government departments almost a year ago and have continued to work with them since.
Thanks, Monique. Time for finance news now with Sam Yang. Hi there, Sam. So Bonza Airlines back in court. What's the latest?
Yeah, so basically Bonza's administrators, Hall Chadwick, have been granted the 2-month extension they were seeking to allow them to continue to find a buyer for the troubled airline. Now, what it means for the employees is that they will have to continue to be stood down without pay and without they won't be able to accept other work for at least 2 months. That sounds tough, but the administrators today told the federal court that selling the company would give staff the best hope of receiving their full entitlements and keeping their jobs. Now, talks with 2 potential buyers are continuing and it could take several weeks, Ross.
How the market's doing?
Well, the Australian share market has rebounded from last Friday's sell-off, and that's after a surge on Wall Street on Friday as well. The All Ords and the ASX 200 index are up around 0.8% each. All sectors are higher except for the energy sector. If I take a look at the movers now, Lendlease lead the standout, rising by 8.9%. In fact, it's rising a bit higher than that, by 9.4% now. So that's after $4.5 billion capital recycling. Asset manager HMC Capital and Emerald Resources are also performing well. On the way down, Ordinate Nickel Industries and West African Resources are losing substantial ground. Turning across the region now, where the NZ 50 is down around 0.2% at the moment. Nikkei in Japan is trading higher, while Chinese markets are also in the green. Now, over to the US, the latest University of Michigan survey found consumers were somewhat less concerned about inflation than earlier this month, sending the Nasdaq to a 5th straight week of gains and record closing high. The Dow Jones index was flat, the S&P 500 up 0.7%, and the Nasdaq Composite gained 1.1%. Onto commodity markets now, spot gold prices are pointing higher after a downturn last week due to lowered rate cut expectations. Oil prices are also pointing higher. And the Australian dollar is a little stronger against the greenback. It's buying around 66.4 US cents. And that's fine, Ross.
Thanks, Sam. Now, have you ever heard of the echidnapus? Probably not, and it's one of 3 new monotreme species that have been unveiled by paleontologists today. The fossils, that are around 100 million years old, were found in Lightning Ridge in New South Wales, making it the most diverse monotreme site on Earth. Professor Chris Helgen led the study. He says the discovery is a key part of Australia's unique animal history.
This is a really exciting story, and it's a quintessentially Australian story. Animals like our platypus and echidna, where do they come from? This is a huge piece of that chapter. So, age of the dinosaurs, 100 million years ago. What we've reported is 3 new kinds of egg-laying mammals, all in very sort of different size and shapes. We knew from Lightning Ridge, from previous opal fossils, about 3 other species already, 3 egg-laying mammals. So it's 3 plus 3, 6, all living at the same time in the same place at Lightning Ridge 100 million years ago. This is the first time in Australian history we have this moment where all the mammals we found in the fossil record are monotremes. They're like the platypus and echidna, and there's so many of them. It's a whole world of monotremes at this moment in Australia. So these 3, one of them is something that I should explain. This is basically just a term of endearment, calling it the echidnapus. This is a largest monotreme, a bit bigger than a platypus. It's got some characteristics that show that it's becoming something like a platypus. Remember, this is a long time ago in the fossil record, but it's also got a narrow snout and jaw that reminds us something of an echidna. So it's not exactly the ancestor of all the echidnas and platypuses, but it's something that early in the record kind of foreshadows these different weird anatomies that we have in the modern species.
A long working life and the changing nature of workplaces means Australians are toiling alongside colleagues decades apart in age, which now spans 4 generations. That's throwing up challenges as workplaces negotiate vastly different life stages. Business reporter Daniel Ziffer joins us now with more. Hi there, Dan. As our workforce expands, how are businesses dealing with the age gaps among staff?
Well, there are a lot of challenges. You're dealing with people who have very different life stages. So beyond the experiences that they bring to work, you have to think about what's going on in their lives at the same time. And now in Australian workplaces, we have such a span of ages. You have everyone going through things like first childbirth through the menopause, people burying parents, people going through family formation. So whilst people have to bring themselves to work and still get the job done, you're seeing real conflict and challenge as you have this vast span of some decades in the same workplace.
So what are the key challenges or conflicts then?
A lot of them are around communication and management. A simple example with communication is that many people talk about frustration, for example, with baby boomers saying they bring notepads and pens, physical items to take notes in meetings. Similarly, those groups often describe their frustration at younger members of society who only use digital means for recording things, will only use a phone or a laptop, never have any kind of physical copy of anything. The bigger one is probably around management styles. Previously, there was a much more hierarchical management style where essentially what the boss said goes, whereas now there is a more collaborative style. It doesn't mean that the boss doesn't have the prerogative to do what they want, but they tend to, if they want to get the best out of people, have to use a more collaborative and listening method to make decisions. I spoke to social researcher Claire Madden about some of these differences.
It can be quite confronting for the older generation seeing the shifts that are being demanded by the younger generations in the workplace when it comes to leadership. So older generations have grown up with a more hierarchical kind of model. Younger generations are responding to collaborative models where they have a voice even from day one in the workplace. So it can create a bit of a tension.
So is the age gap between colleagues set to keep increasing, Daniel?
Well, it is. Well, you'd know this because we're both in Gen Z. That just below us is Gen Alpha, who are just entering high school. The oldest of them, when they get through high school, will be in the same workplace as the youngest of the baby boomers. These generational spans of around 15 to 20 years, they don't explain everything. They certainly don't mean that certain people think certain ways or act certain ways or are better or worse with technology or anything like that. But what they do speak to is about life stages and shared experiences that they've gone through. And what we're seeing now in Australia is 4, soon to be 5 generations in the same workplace, the same work sites, essentially having to work through the different styles of working and how they do things to make it all work.
Daniel, thank you. You can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. Here are the top stories on ABC News. Locals are still searching for survivors of a landslide in Papua New Guinea's Enga province, where more than 670 people are presumed dead. Officials estimate that 150 houses are buried under the rubble. Authorities are establishing evacuation centres on safer ground either side of the landslide. More than 1,000 survivors have been evacuated. Medics in Gaza say at least 35 Palestinians have been killed and dozens more injured following an Israeli airstrike near a camp for displaced people in the city of Rafah. Israel's military says it carried out a precise strike on a Hamas compound and it's reviewing the incident following reports that civilians were harmed. It came hours after air defence systems intercepted a Hamas rocket attack on Israel. 2 people, including a 12-year-old girl, have died in a crash in Sydney's west. Police say a sedan carrying 4 people collided with a ute and rolled on Milperra Road at Milperra, trapping 4 people inside. A 12-year-old girl and a 41-year-old man died at the scene. A 10-year-old boy and a 52-year-old driver have been taken to hospital. The driver of the ute suffered minor injuries and was taken to hospital for mandatory testing. And a Victorian police officer has been accused of racism following a presentation about youth gang crime. Staff from the State's Department of Justice accused the presenter of racial profiling and raised concerns over the display of violent and graphic vision that included CCTV of a stabbing murder. The magnitude 6.6 earthquake north of Tonga has led to the evacuation of its capital, Nuku'alofa. ABC Pacific's Marion Kufu has more from the capital.
This morning, this road behind me was full of vehicles traveling, trying to go inland when the tsunami warning was issued at around 10 a.m. this morning. This is the result of an earthquake that shook Tonga at almost 10 o'clock in the morning this morning. Right behind me is also one of the Catholic schools here in Nuku'alofa, which reacted on a very prompt drill where the students were led by teachers and staff out from this gate onwards towards the safe zone or the tsunami zone that's been allocated to not only the schools but also the villages here. Now, the reason being that the schools and the villages around me was evacuating because right behind the school is the seashore. So these are very vulnerable places that most likely will be hit by tsunami if there was one. I observed today's tsunami evacuation and I think that it was more coordinated with in terms of the people and the village and the schools know where to go, what route to take, because in the villages we have small roads that also walkabout roads that they took enable to reach the destination without having panics and also with order. So today's drill or evacuation was more orderly done so than what happened in 2022. So these is a result of ongoing drills after the 2022 eruption, and the government also played a big role in this, having drills, practices all over in Tonga, especially in the Nuku'alofa area where I am at. And unfortunately, this is a good result with less panicking of people, more orderly with the vehicles, and the people know what route to take and where to go.
More than a dozen people have been killed after powerful storms hit 3 US states. Residents in affected areas woke up to a destroyed landscape with torn up homes and debris scattered across fields. Children are among the reported deaths in Arkansas, Oklahoma.
It's Asia Now. It's 11 a.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 8:30 in New Delhi and 10 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Paul Sung. At this hour, South Korean, Chinese and Japanese leaders begin their first trilateral summit in more than 4 years. The 3 East Asian powers aim to restore top-level dialogue and restart free trade talks. Papua New Guinea is still reeling from a massive landslide, with rescuers racing against time to find any survivors. More than 670 people are feared dead. Dozens of Gazans killed and scores others injured after an Israeli airstrike on the camp in Rafah. The attack follows a rocket assault on Tel Aviv by Hamas militants, marking the first such incident in months. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol is hosting Chinese Premier Li Qiang and Japanese Premier Prime Minister Fumio Kishida for trilateral talks. The summit, being held for the first time in more than 4 years, aims to boost regional cooperation in various spheres. The last time such high-level diplomacy took place among the three countries was in 2019. Today's summit is the 9th such meeting since its inception in 2008 and will be closely watched because South Korea and Japan are trying to manage the growing distrust and tensions between Beijing and Washington. Regional security and economic cooperation is likely to be on the agenda. The leaders are expected to adopt a joint statement on 6 areas of cooperation, including the economy and trade, science and technology, people-to-people exchanges, as well as health and the aging population. Ahead of today's summit, the three leaders held bilateral meetings yesterday. President Yoon and Premier Lee agreed to a diplomatic and security dialogue, as well as to resume free trade talks. Mr. Yoon also asked Beijing to play a greater role as a permanent member of the UN Security Council to help rein in North Korea as it continues to develop its nuclear arsenal and boost military ties with Russia. Premier Lee also met Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Both vowed to deepen cooperation. The leaders discussed a range of issues, including tensions in the South China Sea and the issue of Taiwan. Mr. Lee reiterated that Taiwan is among China's core interests and voiced hopes Japan would honor its promises and create a positive atmosphere to develop their relations. To achieve this, he said Beijing was prepared to carry out multi-field, multi-channel, and multi-level friendly exchanges with Tokyo.
当前的国际政治经济形势确实错综复杂，对于我们中日两国关系来说带来了一些干扰和影响。但是我们两国有2000多年的悠久交往史，这也充分表明我们和平相处、友好合作才是中日关系的主旋律。
North Korea is mentioned, but that's a question that I'll be looking at.
The Shangri-La Dialogue returns for its 21st edition this coming Friday, drawing military top brass from Asia-Pacific and beyond. 2 decades ago, Asia's premier defense summit started as an annual huddle of dozens of defense ministers at a hotel in Singapore.
At the turn of the 20th century, against the backdrop of terror attacks like 9/11 and global security concerns, 14 defense ministers gathered for what was then called the Asia Security Conference, the first of its kind in the region. The U.S. sent a delegation led by its Deputy Defense Secretary. The 1.5-day summit continued to expand its invitation list and sessions over the years and was eventually named after the hotel it's typically held in. In the 5th year of its establishment, high-level officials from China took part in the Shangri-La Dialogue, and by 2018, nearly 50 countries were represented. The dialogue today spans 3 days, opening with a keynote address made typically by a head of state. 7 plenary sessions will then follow, featuring defense ministers, senior officials, and high-ranking military personnel. They will discuss critical and emerging security issues. Since 2003, the U.S. Defense Secretary has addressed the first plenary session.
For great powers to talk to each other.
Your Asia Business Update is next, including earnings at large-scale Chinese industrial firms pick up pace last month, giving a boost to the economy. Plus, the EV unit of dead Saturn's developer China Evergrande has a potential buyer, buying a 29% stake in the company.
At the heart of the Indian Ocean, a paradise under threat.
Just a sea swell would create havoc for us.
A plan.
The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says at least 35 people have been killed in an Israeli strike on a campsite for displaced people in Rafah. The IDF said its warplanes hit a Hamas compound. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says at least 35 people have been killed in an Israeli strike on a campsite for displaced people in Rafah. The IDF said its warplanes hit a Hamas compound with precision ammunition. Ukraine's president calls on his US and Chinese counterparts to attend a peace summit in Switzerland he's hosting to find a deal on ending the war as the death toll rises from Russian airstrikes on Kharkiv. And the French president is in Germany on a mission to save democracy, he says, both nations expecting to see the far right take the lion's share of the seats at the upcoming European Parliament elections. Welcome to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Alexander Orcott. We begin with the latest from the Israel-Hamas war, where Palestinian medics say dozens of people have been killed and wounded by an airstrike on a refugee camp in Rafah. 2 days after the top UN court ordered Israel to stop its attacks on the southern Gaza city, the IDF said it had carried out a precise strike on a Hamas compound, but is reviewing reports that civilians were harmed. At the same time, Hamas kept up its own attacks, firing a salvo of rockets at Tel Aviv for the first time in months. A warning to viewers, the following report contains disturbing images.
The strike took place in Tel al-Sultan neighborhood in western Rafah, where thousands of people were taking shelter in tents. Dozens have been killed or injured in what Hamas described as a massacre and rushed to hospitals around the city.
They burned the people, they burnt them, they burnt a whole neighborhood in Tel al-Sultan. All of a sudden, a missile fell on us, on a neighborhood. All the people are burnt. Go and see what happened to them.
Many in Tel al-Sultan had recently fled the eastern areas of Rafah, where Israeli forces began a ground offensive earlier this month. On Sunday, the Israeli defense minister told troops in Rafah that their goal remains to destroy Hamas and return the hostages, ignoring an order by the International Court of Justice to end the offensive. Earlier on Sunday, Hamas launched at least 8 long-range rockets from Rafah on Tel Aviv, about 100 kilometers north.
There was an air raid and there's no shelter in the house, so my mother and her caregiver stood between the bathroom and the bedroom. We took her carer to hospital for tests, and my mother miraculously survived.
After Israel intercepted the missiles mid-air, there was some damage from shrapnel, like at this home north of Tel Aviv, but no reports of casualties.
After Israel seized the Palestinian side of the Rafah crossing with Egypt this month, a new agreement has allowed aid trucks to enter from southern Israel. It, however, remains unclear if humanitarian groups will be able to access this because of the ongoing fighting in the area. Egypt refuses to reopen its side of the Rafah crossing until control is passed back to the Palestinians. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has appealed to US President Joe Biden and the Chinese leader Xi Jinping to attend his peace summit being held in Switzerland next month. He spoke in English in a charred building in Kharkiv where a Russian missile struck, killing at least 16 people. Zelensky said Ukraine hopes to host as many countries as possible at the Kyiv-led talks aimed at discussing ways to end the war. Jenny Shin has the details.
Thick smoke blankets the sky over Kharkiv. Ukraine's second largest city has been the target of intensified Russian air attacks in recent weeks.
The Russians do not feel how much grief they bring to the Ukrainian people, to children, old people. They don't feel it. They smile and smirk when they talk about it.
Kharkiv is just a few dozen kilometers from the northern border. 27 months into the war, Kyiv is struggling to stave off unrelenting Russian attacks, stretching thin Ukraine's depleted ranks. A status quo that Volodymyr Zelensky wants to turn around, starting with an international peace summit next month. To maximize pressure on Moscow, the Ukrainian president is urging his Chinese counterpart to attend.
To President Biden, the leader of the United States, and to President Xi, the leader of China, please show your leadership in advancing the peace, real peace, not just a pause between the strikes. Please support the peace summit with your personal leadership and participation.
Kyiv will present a 10-point plan at the summit, with a focus on nuclear safety, food safety, and the return of children forcibly deported by Moscow. Russia is not among the 160 delegations invited to the summit by the Swiss government. Zelensky says more than 80 countries have so far confirmed their attendance, scheduled to be held in Lucerne on June 15th.
Moving on now, the French President Emmanuel Macron has embarked on the first state visit to Germany by a French leader in a quarter of a century, bringing warnings that democracy needs to be defended at the upcoming European parliamentary elections. Those just a fortnight away. Polls suggest a major political embarrassment for Macron is on the cards, with his centrist coalition trailing way behind the far right. It's a similar picture for the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz.
An evening of pomp for Emmanuel Macron and his wife Brigitte, hosted by their German counterparts in Berlin, on the first state visit of a French president to Germany since 2000. The two countries are keen to show unity at a time of major challenges for Europe and ahead of critical European parliamentary elections with far-right parties leading the polls in both countries.
It's an important year for democracy in Europe. We feel that we can't rest on our laurels, but we must defend what's important to us.
We have to bring people together in a common dream. I believe that this is one of the best ways to fight against the rise of extremes.
But the most significant part of Macron's trip has yet to come. He will meet with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz on Tuesday at a joint cabinet meeting in which the two governments will seek to find common ground. Macron and Scholz have very different leadership styles and have their policy differences too, notably over defence. Both nations are strong backers of Ukraine, but Macron has refused to rule out potentially sending troops there, while Scholz has been clear that Germany won't. Macron also wants Europe to be more self-reliant and build its own robust defence. Germany, meanwhile, says there's no credible alternative to the US military umbrella.
This Sunday, thousands of Georgians have marked the former Soviet Republic's independence from Russian rule more than a century ago, with further protests. This year, the proceedings have been clouded by a new foreign influence law being pushed through Parliament that critics say will be used to crack down on dissent while taking the nation towards Moscow and further away from any aspirations of EU membership. Neighbouring Armenia also witnessing major protests on Sunday as thousands demanded the resignation of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. This over anger at last month's agreement to hand over territory to the nation's arch-regional nemesis, Azerbaijan, which Yerevan seized decades ago. Pashinyan defended the territorial concessions, however, as saying that they will secure peace with its neighbour following several armed conflicts over the disputed territory. Now, the British opposition Labour Party has dismissed plans by the ruling Conservatives to reintroduce national service after more than 6 decades after it ended in the 1960s, labelling this as a desperate and unfunded gimmick, while Rishi Sunak's government, trading far behind in the polls ahead of the snap election on the 4th of July, said he wants 18-year-olds to spend a year in the military or enrol in 12 months of community service. This will bring a sense of renewed pride in the country, he says.
Young people will gain valuable skills, make our country more secure, and build a stronger national culture. This ambition benefits our country and our young people alike. Just look at Sweden, where 80% of young people completing national service say they'd recommend it to their friends.
And that's where we end this edition. Do stay tuned to France 24.
Hello and welcome to Across Africa.
So we end this edition. Do stay tuned to France 24.
Hello and welcome to Across Africa. I'm Clarisse Fortuné. Our top stories. We'll go to Senegal, where the new government is trying to save the capital seaboard by suspending a wave of development projects. Tunisia's policy towards migrants is drawing international concern. More than 100 migrants were detained in different cities just last week for illegally crossing. One woman is breaking ground in West African music. We follow the first professional female kora player who's shaking up old traditions. All new and ongoing construction works along the coastline of Senegal's capital Dakar are now suspended. In recent years, the once beautiful seaboard has been overshadowed by towering concrete structures, and new Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko created a commission to determine which building developments can go ahead, a move lauded by environmental activist Eliman Dao and Sam Papis.
Mbake Sek has had enough. The environmental activist says Dakar's coastline has been ruined by years of huge construction projects. This was...
The military leader of Burkina Faso will stay in power for another 5 years, but this comes after a new charter was signed following national consultations in the capital Ouagadougou on Saturday. The talks included civil society representatives, the security and defense forces, and lawmakers. However, most political parties did not participate. Colonel Moussa Diallo, the chairman of the organizing committee, announced the transition will last for 60 months from July 2 this year. Burkina Faso joins a growing list of West African countries where the military has taken control, accusing elected governments of failing to deliver on their promises. The current military junta took power in September 2022, ousting Lieutenant Colonel Paul Damiba, who had himself staged a coup earlier that year. The transitional government has been operating under a constitution approved by a diverse National Assembly. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has promised significant investment in skills training to boost the economy. He made this declaration on Saturday during the ANC's final rally ahead of the country's main election on May 29. The ANC is under unprecedented pressure to keep hold of its parliamentary majority.
We are also going to spend quite a lot of money, billions, training people to get skills that can be best used in our economy, because our objective is to create quality jobs, and in order to do so, we want to build industries. We want to localize so that more and more products are made here in South Africa.
The ANC president says they are collaborating closely with various stakeholders to put an end to the intermittent electricity power crisis.
Also end load shedding. We will complete the work, that is the excellent work that has already been done, yes, to tackle our electricity crisis.
The proposal have the ANC support at less than 50%, raising the possibility that it will lose its majority this time and have to form a national coalition to stay in government.
An advanced team of Kenyan police officials who are assessing preparedness before a multinational force is deployed to quell violence in Haiti is heading back home after the planned deployment was delayed over logistical issues. The team is due to arrive back from Haiti on Monday after recommending a deployment delay that was later announced by the president. A senior Kenyan officials who declined to be named, as they are not the official spokesperson, said the bases are still under construction and crucial resources including vehicles are needed before deployment of the first 200 police officers from Kenya can take place. The deployment was due to start this week, but President William Ruto said it will be delayed for 3 weeks. The US President Joe Biden on Thursday expressed deep appreciation to Ruto, who was on a state visit for the deployment to help quell gang violence in Haiti. The United States has agreed to contribute $300 million to a multinational force that will include 1,000 Kenyan police officers and others drawn from Jamaica, the Bahamas, the Antigua and Barbuda, and other countries.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.